it's the Midnight Raven, and today we are looking at the case of the Melbourne killer known as Mr. Cruel. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm the Midnight Raven, and this is True Crime with Raven. This is part one in a two-part case because there are so many details to this case that we need to look at to try and work out and identify who was Mr. Cruel. So, Mr. Cruel is the name that was given to a serial killer of young girls. Mr. Cruel's first victim was an 11-year-old girl who was assaulted in her own home. At around 4 a.m. in August 1987, a family of four were confronted by a masked man. He was armed with a knife and a shotgun and had entered the house from a living room window. Always remember, at night, lock your doors and windows. The masked man entered the house and he would bound and gag both the parents, leaving the two children sitting in the lounge. The intruder would tie the 7-year-old son to his bed, and the other child, that was a young girl, would be assaulted over 2 hours. 2 hours later, the intruder would leave the house with a box of records and a jacket. During the attack on this family, the intruder was supposedly have made a phone call on the phone to someone threatening the safety of the children, overheard by the young boy. The police would examine the phone call records from that house and would find no call had been made. Possibly Mr. Cruel was playing a cruel game with the children on the phone, threatening their lives, maybe to cause panic, maybe to heighten their senses, or maybe to terrorize the parents that were locked in a wardrobe. So, in December 1988 in Ringwood, a few miles from the attack, John Willis woke up around 5:30 with a gun barrel to his forehead. The intruder restrained John and his wife before abducting their 10-year-old daughter, Sharon. This young girl was blindfolded and gagged with a ball. The intruder stole £35 from the house and took nothing else but their daughter. Sharon was amazingly kept well. She was given food and milk before later being released unharmed. Before being released, she had her nails on her hands and feet clipped. She was stripped of all her clothes. She had her teeth brushed, and her limbs were dressed in green bin bags after her clothes had been taken. She was then taken to a local school where she was left tied to the railings outside. While in captivity, she was tied by the neck with a neck brace to a bed, and her eyes were covered with a blindfold, briefly being able to see under the blindfold where she would find a camera on a tripod. The masked man would strike again in 1990 in July, where a 13-year-old girl, Nicola, was at home with her sister while their parents were at a farewell party. The masked man burst into the house around midnight and would find Nicola and her elder sister in the home alone. The elder sister would be tied and blindfolded, while the younger sister would be tied and blindfolded and then left in one room, and the elder sister was tied to a bed. The masked men told them that their dad would need to pay £25,000 for the ransom of Nicola, and if they wanted Nicola safely returned, the money would need to be provided. The young girl Nicola was then bundled into their parents' rental car before being driven off, leaving her elder sister tied to a bed with the fact that it would cost her dad £25,000 to get her sister back. So after driving off in the parents' rental car, the masked men then bundled the girl into another car, taking her to a place where she was held for around 50 hours was mentally and physically tortured and was assaulted and kept as prisoner before she was later dumped by a suburban power station. Sharon, as well, was dressed in bin bags, had her clothes removed, had her teeth brushed, and had both her fingernails and toenails clipped once again, like the previous victims. This was to ensure that DNA could not be picked up from the clothes, from the assault, or anywhere on the young girl's person. This was to keep the identity of the killer, hopefully, to be a mystery. The family received at no point during Sharon's abduction a ransom note of any description or contact from her kidnapper. The police also didn't receive any ransom demands apart from the ransom demand that was given to her sister on that night, demanding the £25,000, although Sharon had been found and dropped off safely. So there were no signs that the children that lived at that home had any way of Mr. Cruel knowing that children were living there. In the garden were no play equipment, there were no bikes out on the path, and nothing to suggest that were kids living at this home. Were they just a crime by chance? So a police report said that Mr. Cruel had identified the next houses that he would visit as of April 1991. The next house he planned to target had 2-meter fences and electric gates, but this apparently would prove no obstacle for Mr. Cruel, who would break into this home wearing a green-grey tracksuit and using a balaclava to cover his face. His next victims will be found in part 2 coming soon. So if you want to see part 2 of this case, give it a big thumbs up. This is a very interesting case of Mr. Cruel, and I have been fixated with the details of this case, how he kidnapped the girls and at this point in the story had kept them all alive, making sure that DNA couldn't trace him, making sure he covered his tracks, very wisely covering his face, taking DNA off the victims, and at this point leaving his victims alive. Was there any way these victims could identify him? We will find out soon in part 2. So, this is the case of the Melbourne killer known as Mr. Cruel. If you want to see part 2, remember to click that notification bell, as you will find part 2 coming tomorrow. And if you don't want to miss another video, make sure you subscribe as well. So this has been True Crime with the Midnight Raven. I am Raven. Thank you for watching, and part 2 will be coming tomorrow. Take care and thanks for watching. Bye guys.